All right, we got a troubleshooting video for you today. I think I already know what the problem is with this system, but we're gonna find out. Friend of mine's friend, this is his build. Built it back in November-ish of last year and has started having weirdness issues. You gotta love the diagnosis when it's weirdness. But anyway, very long email actually with all the things that they've tried. We'll go through the email first. I'll tell you what I'm thinking and then we'll test it. When I say he wrote a long email explaining the things that he tried or whatnot, I wasn't kidding, but that's obviously very helpful. I'm just gonna sort of cliff notes this. Was built back in November of 2024. It is ASUS BTF product. So as you can see, this is a 4090, I believe it's a 4090, with the BTF connector, so it gets power through the motherboard. All the motherboard power connectors are on the back, so it's a full back to front, or they're calling back to the future, or whatever they're calling it now. First thing it says in here is one of the most consistent problems he was having was anytime the computer went to sleep, it was guaranteed to crash and wouldn't wake back up. 95% of the time, he would have to reboot the system, full power cycle it to come back to wake, which there's a lot of reasons why that could be. But that's the first thing he started noticing. Then he started noticing weird blue screens of death, right? The BSODs, which we've seen quite a bit. Now he did mention that he was using the AI overclocking utility built into the ASUS motherboards. They've been there for quite a while. That's basically a one-touch overclock. Just quick high level, if you guys are wondering how they come up with that, ASUS tests across 1,000 CPUs or something like that, and then they find where it can safely sort of push the limits of the CPU clock speed to not crash so much. This is an Intel system with a 14900K, so you guys kind of know where I'm leading with some of this, but anyway, the blue screens of death started getting worse and worse. And what I mean by worse and worse is the instances at which the blue screen of death would happen would be kind of inconsistent. Gaming started becoming an issue where he was getting blue screens of death while gaming. Backed off the AI overclock, and then things were better, he said, for a little while, and then got worse. He also changed out the RAM. As you can see, he's got 4 sticks of RAM, so obviously we do have a little bit extra stress on the memory controller. Fortunately, Intel's usually pretty good about being able to run XMP profile with 4 sticks of RAM, but XMP is also an overclock on the CPU. Let's see, moving on from there, he started to notice an issue where USB drop out entirely. USB would just stop working. Keyboard, mouse, doesn't matter if you plugged it back into other devices or whatnot, or actually just the mouse. Keyboard worked fine. But he noticed that the mouse would stop working. So he could use the keyboard, get to device manager, and then the USB device would say no driver or whatever, and couldn't reinstall the driver. It just would not reinstall no matter what he did. But interestingly enough, it seemed like the mouse was working in the BIOS, so that starts to seem like some sort of a weird OS problem, right? Moving on from there, he started thinking that maybe something was wrong with his Windows install and that something was maybe corrupt with that. So he basically took the Windows installer, his ISO or his USB installer, and then would go to install Windows, and it continued to crash anytime it started to unpack the files. Because when Windows installs, the first thing it does is it unpacks all the files onto the SSD, so it's faster to install from the SSD than the USB. So that unpacking process would crash every single time. He even thought maybe it was his drive. He's got one Crucial T705 2 terabyte Gen 5 drive, that's a very fast drive. A second T705 1 terabyte, a third T7105 1 terabyte, a fourth 980 Pro 1 terabyte Gen 4, and a second 980 Pro 1 terabyte Gen 4. Yeah, so lots of storage in this, first of all. But he started thinking maybe something was wrong with the drive, and that was causing the problem. So he would install Windows, it would crash, swap the drive, it would crash. He finally got on the phone with ASUS tech support, which I think this will be funny. His exact words are, "I called ASUS tech support, and they're about as useless as they come. I spent over an hour on the phone with one guy attempting to isolate the issue by swapping out the hard drive and then attempting to reinstall Windows. He asked me to remove all the drives and attempt to install Windows on the primary drive, and I did, and it crashed. I placed another M.2 drive in the same slot and attempted to install, but it crashed. At that point, I got disconnected from the tech for some reason. I called back and got another tech, and he would not connect me with the same tech, and wanted me to start over again. And I just didn't have time for that. What's the point of collecting a callback number if they don't call you back?" Sounds like an ASUS story to me. Anyway, moving on. We don't think it's a drive problem because he's tried it with just one drive installed at a time and several drives with the same crashing issue. I do think what we're dealing with here is potential 13/14th gen degradation. That's what I think we're dealing with. Everything he's describing sounds very cookie cutter to what everyone that's experienced degradation would experience. And we know stock CPUs can degrade with just out of the box settings. You add the overclocking aspect to it as well. And we know that a lot of these overclocking utilities built into motherboards like to just brute force voltage into the CPU for the sake of stability. Unfortunately, that is also brute forcing the degradation problem to sort of accelerate and become more prevalent quicker. So what I'm gonna do right now is I want to just take my installer and see if I experience the same thing. And one of the ways I'm gonna try and diagnose whether or not what we're dealing with here is a degradation problem is by going into the BIOS and severely underclocking the CPU. If I can severely underclock the CPU and it progresses just fine through the process, that's gonna tell me clean as day, clear as day, this is a degradation problem. There's a few ways that we can also test. There's several tests that actually are very useful at kind of identifying the degradation problem. In fact, Falcon Northwest was kind of instrumental in helping us through that whole era to make sure we understood how to recreate it and such. And one of the ways that they actually told us they can recreate a degraded CPU is failed Windows installs because of that file unpacking process. But first, I want to recreate his Windows installer attempt because it's going to be very awkward if it installs for us. Now, also too, he does say he's on the latest BIOS. One of the things he did when all this started happening was like, you know what? People were suggesting I should update my BIOS because he did do some searching. He didn't find any of the degradation discussion, which I think is kind of interesting, especially with how much we covered it. But anyway, a lot of people were like, hey, you should update your BIOS. So I can't immediately boot this up and go to BIOS and say, look, it's on the old BIOS. It's probably the problem because that has been updated. But if the CPU has already started to show degradation, there's no reverting that. There's no going back. So anyway, with all that said, let's go ahead and just see what happens when in fact, first thing first, I'm gonna go into the BIOS and I'm going to see what the current BIOS version is and what it sort of looks like. Okay, it's on Intel default and enforce all limits. It's a little late for that, to be honest. No NVMe devices found. We decided we're gonna pull out the other drives. We're gonna leave one drive in there and see if that helps. I don't know. To be honest, this is kind of fun, to be honest. So today we learned if you reset to factory defaults, it does not disable the RAID controller. And I'm sure many of you have already figured this out before we got to this point, but we have the drive now showing up in here into the NVMe controller drive information. What we found out is if the Intel Rapid Storage or RAID controller built into the motherboard is active, the drives will not show up anywhere else, and you cannot install on the drive from Windows because you need to install the RAID driver, essentially, for Windows. Resetting to default after you nuke the RAID, I would think would turn off the RAID controller, because he did set up a RAID, he said that. So anyway, what we have to do to make it work is go up here into the system agent configuration, go down to VMD setup, and then disable it there. If you enable it, then the drives don't show up. Back to step one, I was trying. I'll put the other drives in later, but this is still a good idea to have single stick of RAM and a single drive in here when we're trying to install. The whole point of getting to this part was I was simply trying to recreate the blue screen when installing Windows. And step one was make drive show. It's gonna be crazy if it works for us, because the only thing he didn't say he tried that we did was remove the other sticks of RAM. Now this might be pretty obvious for a lot of you, but the reason why the CPU is involved and why it matters with CPU when it comes to amount of RAM is because quite a few generations ago, the RAM controller was moved from the motherboard to onboard the CPU. So the CPU is 100% responsible for the RAM stability. Okay, so we just had our first blue screen. It was actually happening when I was going to install OCCT. Now we have a little development here. There are 4 sticks of RAM, as you can see, and you saw one of the things I did was remove 3 sticks of RAM to simplify our, let's complicate our troubleshooting methods. I called and he looked into his Micro Center account, and that says kernel security check failure. That's what that says. We're gonna start getting weird errors here. Anyway, he did say these are 2 64 gig kits, not a single 128 gig kit, which, as you know, if you followed the QVLs, especially when it comes to 4 sticks of RAM, they must be matched. So, first thing I had to do was get past any of the RAM issues, which is now where we've started getting the blue screens to happen, which is kind of nice because so far I already told, actually what it took was me telling them, I can't recreate your problem, and then the universe is like, oh yeah, we can. So what was happening here is I was trying to install OCCT so I could just have it do a varying load CPU test, and I would double click the installer and the splash screen would come up and the splash screen would go away and nothing would happen. And then it just kept doing that and I couldn't get it to work. So I said, fine, I'm just go ahead and reboot the system. I restarted the system and then tried to install it again, and we'll see if I can recreate it. And I was getting there we go. I was getting an issue where it would just blue screen on me before even launching the software. There's the splash screen. There's the blue screen. System service exception. So I'm still pretty convinced it's a degraded CPU because we're getting a different error every time. Now I can move on to my step of massively underclocking the CPU to see if it goes more stable. If it does, then I'm pretty convinced it's a degraded CPU. I can throw in one of ours just to make sure it's all working. But yeah, I think this is gonna be a pretty cut and dry, swap in a new CPU and everything's fixed. But you can see the weirdness we're dealing with that can throw people off, especially if you've never heard of the degraded CPU problem. The guy was ready to throw a new motherboard at it and do all kinds of things, and I was like, nope, I think I know what the problem is, bring it by. So let's just make it like 3,500. That's all we're gonna do right there. 3 gigahertz on the
30. Not 300 megahertz.
There we go. I was trying to make it 30 megahertz or 300. Yeah, I get 300. All right, let's just do this and let's see now if the computer will start doing things without crashing. It doesn't mean, like, this isn't guaranteed that we're gonna be able to isolate the fact that it's a degraded CPU, but it's a good place to start. It's something we have to, when we do these kinds of videos, and we're trying to educate, we have to try and recreate your scenario. It's not gonna be that you have a wall of product over there that you could just grab something and start throwing parts at it and say, see, fixed. We have to assume you don't have another CPU to throw in. You don't have other RAM to throw in. So that's why we simplify the RAM with 1 stick. And then and something else I want to point out that's very unique about this. The serial numbers for all 4 of these sticks are a numerical, what's the word I'm looking for? Sequence. So the last number of all 4 sticks go up by 1 each time. So that means these are 2 separate kits that just stayed next to each other from packaging to Micro Center distribution, to Micro Center store, to unboxing to shelf. They stayed together, which is crazy, because that's why I had to call them and ask them. I went, wait a minute, if all 4 serial numbers are like end in 155, 156, 157, 158, you would think those were packaged together, but they weren't. He verified by looking at his account, they were 2 separate packs of RAM. So that was kind of interesting to see. Okay, so let's, cool. So it's not going above 3.5 at all. It popped up and it went away. So you saw I couldn't even start it before. Except, okay. Let's just do CPU real quick. We'll do mode extreme. We'll do a variable load, threads, course cycling. Just start. This could probably pass, and it probably will because I've downclocked it so far. The fact that all we needed to gain stability back was downclocking the CPU, this is what the Intel degradation scenario looks like. It looks like some things are guaranteed to crash it, while other things don't seem to, or things that were working fine suddenly aren't, and things that weren't working, Windows install, suddenly are. So, don't ask me why I was able to get Windows to install when it wasn't installing for him, but we were obviously able to. And our clock speeds right now are at 3.5 gigahertz on the P core and 3 gigahertz on the E core. So It's running nice and cool, 50C. We'll just let this run for just a few minutes, to be honest. But I feel pretty confident now that if I drop another CPU in here, it's gonna be fine. And that's what the next step needs to be. All right, so it's gone for 23 minutes. So just for some sanity check here, I'm gonna throw in a 14700K. I don't have a 900K that's loose right now, but if I can just throw this in, let it run all defaults and it's fine, because this is a known good CPU, then yeah. I'm so convinced I actually already ordered the 14900KF, which he has in here. It'll be here tomorrow morning. But yeah, I think this was just a standard degradation problem, if you will. Well, you look at that. Imagine telling an app to open and having it open. Yeah, I think we're pretty solidly convinced the CPU at this point. It's running pretty warm right now, this particular one. But yeah, I mean, I can do the stress test in the background. I can bring up Microsoft games and play around with Solitaire, bring up the store, bring up the browser, bring up File Explorer. Like, this would have sent the thing into an absolute frenzy if it could have even gotten that far. But what I'm gonna do now is I need to test the RAM. Because he could have been dealing with both, to be honest. He could have honestly been dealing with bad RAM and a bad CPU. Okay, so we're about to do a RAM test right here. I want to point out I've got all 4 sticks back in here. I've got them manually set to 4600 megahertz for all 4 sticks. We cannot get any set of RAM to run XMP on this motherboard, period. This RAM is actually not on the QVL list. Neither is like any of the Crucial sets of RAM that I have. Neither are the G-Skill sets of RAM that I have. This Kingston Fury Renegade is, however, and this is a 96 gig kit. It's a non-binary RAM, so it's 2 48 gig sticks. It is on the QVL. And it also will boot loop if you try to enable XMP. So I don't know what is going on with this board. It's also not like we can update it to different BIOS. As I've already said, it's on the latest. So this has just been sort of a shit show when it comes to ASUS, this particular board, and for whatever reason, the RAM just will not run at XMP. So I just did a quick, like, default on these 4 sticks of RAM is 3600 megahertz, because it really slows down the RAM when you add all 4 sticks in there for stability reasons. I have it set, like I said, to 4600 right now, and I'm running the OCCT RAM test to see if there's any issues that are gonna come up. But I'm gonna call this one pretty much solved. It's exactly as I thought. It is a degraded CPU. We finally have our hands on one. We did try and do this a while back, but the CPU that we got died fully before we were able to do anything with it, so it wouldn't even post. So now we have a degraded CPU that we need to make sure we keep nice and labeled. But it's not mine. If he sells the box and all that stuff, if he has he bought it in November, I think he said. So he should be able to get this warranty, to be honest. He should warranty that. But he needs the system up and running fast, so I ordered a 14900KF off Amazon. It was $424. It'll be here tomorrow morning, so I can get the system up and running for him. All right, so it's the next day. Fortunately, we live in an Amazon next day delivery area for the most part, and I'm gonna use this RAM as a knife. Anyway, so there we go. I'm gonna throw in the 14900KF. I gotta throw his drives back in and the cover back on there. I gotta get his drives provisioned, make sure they're showing up and whatnot. He can go back in and reinstall Windows and do another RAID if he wants to. Those 2 T705 drives in RAID are more than 22,000 megabytes a second. We did a video, well, short about that. So let me throw these back in. Let me make sure everything's working. I'll try XMP with 1 stick again, just out of curiosity to see if it was maybe a CPU thing. I find it hard to believe my 14700K would not be able to do XMP, but then again, this RAM is also not on the QVL list for this motherboard, so there is that. All right, 14900KF. It's $424 on Amazon, which isn't, I don't think as good as the Micro Center price technically, but it was available overnight. But it's cheaper than Best Buy. Best Buy was like $475 for the same one. So, all right, let's install this. So the 14900KF is in. I got 128 gigabytes of RAM running at 5,000 mega transfers. Remember yesterday we got 4,600 to go. Got 5,000 to go now. So I'm gonna let OCCT do like a full mem test and all that to make sure it's stable. But let's see now, can we launch OCCT with the new CPU? Remember last time, this was all it took to make the CPU just absolutely shit itself. So asking it to do anything, honestly, was pretty badly degraded, like really badly degraded. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and call this one resolved at this point. We're gonna do CPU and RAM, large data set, normal mode, variable load type, instruction sets, auto, that's fine. Let's just go with that. So we're gonna call this one fixed. So this CPU, his bad one would still very much be under warranty. But the thing is, he needs his CPU up and running now. So he was like, just do what you gotta do to make it work. Buy the new CPU, I'll reimburse you for it. And he can still go through Intel to get this thing warranted, and then he'll have a spare CPU where he can sell that one to recoup some cost. But there's actually, believe it or not, a new microcode coming out for Intel even. Not out yet, but apparently a very small percentage of CPUs that have not been degraded yet, but have only run under the newest conditions with the newest microcode and the all the voltage reductions and the wattage reductions and stuff. A very small percentage of them apparently is still failing under these conditions that are supposed to alleviate the problems. That just shows the 14th gen specifically. I don't know if it's affecting 13th gen too, probably, but they're pushed beyond the envelope of where they're considered reliable at this point. So your guess is as good as mine as to when they're gonna finally get this resolved. I think at this point, they're just hoping like, you know what, with Core Ultra being out and whatever the next gen Core Ultra is gonna look like, it'll just sort of work itself out with time where enough people maybe will eventually upgrade away or maybe just switch to AMD so that they won't have to worry about this. But there we go, these temps are great, 65C. Although it's not full CPU load right now, but anyway, 65C, we're gonna let this run, stress test, make sure it can make it through the full hour, including CPU and RAM. And yeah, we'll call it a day. So from beginning, fresh build, to as bad as you guys saw with the degradation, November till now. Did not take very long, like 6 months. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Remember, if you're running an Intel system, 13th to 14th gen specifically, keep the BIOS up to date. And if you have been running your CPU since the beginning and you've got all kinds of weirdness, even if you updated your BIOS and stuff, if they already started to degrade, it can continue to degrade even after the new voltages and the new wattages and stuff. So you may very well still have a bad CPU that's just not as bad as this one as you saw. But if you're starting to get random blue screens and you're like, I'm running all stock and stuff, it's a very safe bet that you are probably degraded if you're not running super fast RAM or XMP profiles and overclocks and stuff like that. So sucks, but it's still there. It's still peeking its ugly head saying, remember me? And I think that's why every SI I talk to says they're selling 4 AMD systems for every 1 Intel, which is crazy. That did not take long for that to flip. All right, guys, thanks for watching. As always, we'll see you in the next one.